Now that we understand how to add and subtract positive and negative numbers, we're ready to learn how to multiply and divide these same numbers. When we were adding and subtracting numbers, the sign of the answer was always related to the sign of the larger number. Remember, negative 7 plus 5 equals negative 2. 2 because 7 minus 5 equals 2, and negative because 7 is larger than 5. So we use the sign of the larger number. The good news is that with multiplication and division, all we look at is the sign of the numbers. We need to be able to handle finding the sign of the answers for problems like these. And we should also consider a problem like this, with more than 2 numbers and multiple negative signs. Here's the good news. The sign of the answers of all these problems comes from a table that lays out how to handle signs in multiplication and division. The table looks like this. 2 positive numbers multiplied together makes a positive number. Likewise, a positive times a negative is negative. A negative times a positive is negative, and a negative times a negative is a positive. The negative times a negative becomes a positive for the same reason that minus negative 6 is a positive. 2 negative signs are hitting the same number. So, the sign of the answer is not determined by the size of the numbers or the size of the answer, only by the signs of the 2 numbers being multiplied or divided. For example, 3 times 5 is positive 15. 3 times negative 15 is negative 15. Only one negative sign. 3 times positive 5, negative 3 times positive 5 is negative 15. Again, only one negative sign. And negative 3 times negative 5 is positive 15, with 2 negative signs. Now, speaking of this last example, it would not be good to write the number this way, but it is okay to think of it as negative 3 times negative 5 is negative negative 15 equals 15. Both negative signs hit the 15 just like before. Let's consider the following. What would a negative times a negative times a negative equal? The first 2 negative numbers, if you multiply them, would multiply to give you a positive number. So, those 3 negative numbers multiplied reduces to a positive from the first 2 negative numbers times a negative, the third number we haven't used yet. So 3 negative numbers multiplied together gives you a negative answer. As an example, 4 times negative 4 times negative 3 times negative 2 means negative 4 times negative 3 equals positive 12, double negative, and then positive 12 times negative 2 equals negative 24. Let's go crazy now. Would you get a positive or a negative answer if you multiply 4 negative numbers together? The first 2 negative numbers multiply up to a positive, and the last 2 negative numbers multiply up to a positive, which gives you positive times positive, which equals a positive. So, negative 4 times negative 3 times negative 2 times negative 1 has a size of 24, because 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 equals 24, and the sign is positive. Now, what's the pattern? If you're multiplying numbers and have 0 negative signs, the answer is positive. If there's 1 negative sign in the multiplication, the answer is negative. And if there are 2 negative signs in the multiplication, the answer is positive. For 3 negative signs in the multiplication, we get a negative. And for 4 negative signs in the multiplication, we get a positive. Yep, that's an odd and even pattern. If there's an even number of signs, you get a positive answer. And if there's an odd number of signs, you get a negative answer. So, if I had 7 negative numbers all multiplied together, what would the sign of the answer be? Yep, negative. Now, here's some good news. The rules for division of positive and negative numbers are exactly the same as the rules for multiplying. Positive divided by positive is positive. Positive divided by negative is negative. Negative divided by positive is negative. And negative divided by negative is positive. We count up the signs the same way we did with the multiplication. So, if we have negative 1 times negative 2 times negative 3 divided by negative 2 times negative 3, the size of the answer is going to be 1. But what will the sign be? There are 5 negative numbers, all multiplied or divided. So since 5 is an odd number, the sign of the answer is negative. Now it's time to practice. I'll show you a problem, hit pause, work it out, take as much time as you need, and once you're done with the problem, hit play, and I'll go through the answers with you. So, here's the first problem. -5 times 3. Since there's one negative sign in this multiplication, the answer is going to be negative. And since 5 times 3 equals 15, the answer is going to be -15. Now, next problem. -5 times 3 times -2. Since there's two negative signs in this multiplication, the answer is going to be positive. And since 5 times 3 equals 15, and 15 times 2 equals 30, the answer is going to be 30. Here's the next problem. -2 times 3 times -2 times -3. Because there are 3 negative signs in the multiplication, the answer is going to be negative. And because 2 times 3 equals 6, and also the other 2 times 3 equals 6, 6 times 6 equals 36. So the answer is going to be -36. Next problem. -20 divided by -4. Because there are 2 negative signs in this division problem, the answer is going to be positive. And since 20 divided by 4 equals 5, the answer will be positive 5. Next problem. -20 divided by positive 10. Because there's only one negative sign in the whole problem, the answer is going to be negative. And 20 divided by 10 equals 2. So the answer is going to be -2. Next problem. -14 times -2 divided by -7. Because there are 3 negative signs in the multiplication and division, the answer is going to be negative. Since 14 times 2 equals 28, 28 divided by 7 equals 4, the answer is going to be -4. Now let's compare multiplication to addition. It's really important that we keep the rules of multiplication and the rules of addition separate. So I'll show you 2 problems, one multiplication problem and one addition problem. Hit pause, work them out, take as long as you need, and once you're done, hit play and we'll go through them together. Now, let's work on these problems. -2 times -3. Because there's 2 negative signs in the multiplication problem, the answer is positive. And since 2 times 3 equals 6, the answer is positive 6. Now the addition problem. Since the sign of the numbers are the same, which is negative, we're just going to add the numbers up. 2 plus 3 equals 5. And since the signs were negative, the answer is -5. Now, next set of problems. -2 times 5. Since there's one negative sign in the multiplication, the answer is going to be negative. And because 2 times 5 equals 10, the answer is -10. Now the addition problem. -2 plus positive 5. Since there are 2 different signs, the sign of the answer is going to be of the bigger number, which is 5, and it's a positive. So we're going to subtract 5 minus 2, which will equal 3. So the answer is 3. Now, next set of questions. -5 times positive 3. Because there's only one negative sign in the multiplication, the answer is going to be negative, and 5 times 3 equals 15. So the answer is -15. Now for the addition. -5 plus 3. Since there's 2 different signs, we're going to subtract the numbers. 5 minus 3. The answer is 2, and we're going to take the sign of the larger number, which is 5. So the answer to the question is -2.